Good afternoon and a warm welcome to Professor Victoria Demnova, Dr. Shashibala, and all the distinguished members of the audience today. The lecture today will review the history of three Buddhist regions of Russia, Burtia, Tuva, and Kalmykia, and the creation of specific styles of Buddhist art, Thangka and sculpture, in these territories, highlighting their specific features. Dr. Demenova will also examine the history of museum collections of Buddhist art in St. Petersburg and Moscow, the Urals and Serbia regions of Russia, the main researchers in these fields and their works, and the specifics of studying Buddhist art in Russia. Victoria Demenova has a PhD in History of Arts and is the Dean of Faculty of History of Arts, Cultural Studies and Design, Ural Federal University, Russia. She is also the official expert for the Ministry of Culture of Russia for the Ural region in the field of Oriental art. Dr. Demenova is the committee chairperson of International Scientific Symposium on Buddhist Art, Traditions and Innovations, Committee Chairperson Research Conference, Questions of Expertise in Culture, Art and Design, Ekaterinburg, Russia. Dr. Demenova has researched on the collection of Buddhist art in the central and regional museums of Russia, different styles of Buddhist art, cross-cultural aspects in ancient Eastern and Western arts. She has authored collection of Buddhist sculpture of the Sverdlovsk region, Museum of Local History, and Space of Meanings of Buddhist Metal Sculpture. She edited a collection of papers compiled for the book Contemporary Buddhist Art, Traditions and Innovations, and Buddhist Art in Eurasian Cultural Spaces, Diversity in Harmony. In 2018, she co-authored the catalog and organizer of the exhibition Our East, Buddhist Art in Collections of 14th to 20th Centuries in the Museums and Private Collections. The exhibition included a collection of State Hermitage Museum, St. Petersburg, the Museum of Local History of the Urals, and the Museum of Fine Arts of Yekaterinburg, the Museum of Fine Arts of Chelyabinsk, and 3 private collections in Russia. So once again, a very warm welcome to you, and please come. We look forward to your presentation and your lecture.
Good afternoon for every. It's a great pleasure and honor for me to be here, and let me tell big thanks for INTAC and to Dr. Manisha Singh for invitation. I'm really happy to be here, and my warmly thanks to Professor Shashibala, who helped me a lot at all the time and many aspects in our common and separate projects. Thank you a lot. Let me start. Before I begin discussing the Buddhist art collection, I would like to briefly outline the history of Buddhism in Russia. It is important because Buddhism, like Islam, is a subject for researchers and art collectors on one hand, but on another hand, this Eastern religion form is integral part of our country. Buddhism is one of the 3 official religions in Russia. Official religions include Orthodox Christianity, Islam, and Buddhism. Orthodox Christianity, okay, not so close. Okay. Orthodox Christianity is certainly the most widespread and old religion tradition. However, Buddhism is over 4 centuries of history in Russia. Until the end of 20th century, out of about 150 ethnic groups living in Russia, Three were officially recognized as Buddhists: Buryat, Kalmyk, and Tuvans. Out of these three, Kalmyks was the first to become a part of Russian Empire. They were a descendants of Oirats who moved from Western Mongolia to the steppes of Lower Volga region during the first 3 decades of the 17th century. Today, this is the territory of Republic of Kalmykia. They officially converted to Buddhism during the late 16th century, although by the time they were already familiar with Buddhism for 300 years. As a result, when the Kalmyks became a part of Russian Empire, they were already Buddhists. The second Buddhist people were Buryats. Their territory were gradually absorbed by the Russian Empire in the middle 7th century. Today, this is a territory of Republic of Buryatia. Even at the time, Russian diplomats passing through their territories to their way to the China noticed that the Buryats had portable prayer house called dugans, which later were replaced by the temples. However, Buddhism began to spread actively among Buryats only during the first 3 decades of 18th century. Finally, Tuva, the present-day Republic of Tuva. Tuva became a part of Russia, then USSR, only in 1944, during and just a little after Great War. Before this, from 1921 to 1943, it was independent, after being early a vassal territory of China. The acceptors of Tuvans were already familiar with Buddhism during the early medieval period. Then their land formed a part of Uyghur Khaganate, 18th-10th centuries. However, Tuvans themselves converted to Buddhism only in the late part of 18th century. But early 20th century, they already had monasteries and system of training and schooling for monks. Tuvans became the third ethnic group within Russia officially recognized as Buddhists. All of them belonging to the Gelug school. It is Vajrayana or Mahayana school. By early 18th century, Buryatia already had 11 felt Dugans temple. This is Tuvan, for example, like you see, it's very interesting object, maybe palace, maybe monastery, we don't know exactly, and Republic of Buryatia. In 1712, 150 Mongolian and Tibetan lamas arrived in that region Buryatia. However, Tsongolsky Datsan, the first permanent Buddhist monastery in Transbaikal region, was built only in the middle 18th century. In 1741, Empress Elizaveta Petrovna signature a decree officially accepting Buddhism as a Buryatian religion. In 1991, Republic of Buryatia commemorated the 215th anniversary of this decree. Another famous Russian empress, Catherine the Great, established by her supreme decree position of Pandit Khamba Lama, head of Russian Buddhists in eastern Siberia and Transbaikal region. Catherine the Great was recognized as one of the incarnations of White Tara. In 1764, head Lama of Tsongolsk Datsan was officially recognized as the chief Lama of Transbaikal Buryatians. Receiving the title of Pandita Khamba Lama, the learned high priests, this confirmed Buryatia Buddhist special position regarding Tibet and Mongolia. Although spiritual authority of Tibetan Dalai Lamas had been always recognized by Buryatian lamas and worships. By the early 20th century, Buryatia had 47 monasteries and over than 10,000 lamas. The major Datsans was Tsongol, Gusino-Ozerский, Otamchinsky Datsan, Aginsky, Aninsky, Atsagatsky, Egituysky, Tsugulsky Datsan, and so on. For example, Gusino-Ozerский. Buddhism played an enormous role in the development of Buratian national culture. Datsan hosted faculties that taught philosophy, logic, medicine, tantra, and so on. They written religious, scholarly, and popular didactic literature. They had worshipped their painters, woodcutters, sculptors, scribes, and many other workers. As a result, Buddhist monasteries literally became the main spiritual and cultural centers in a traditional Buryat society. The educational work of Buryat Datsan is very well known. 29 of them had their own printing houses, or rather print shops. Their wood blocks, they using manually of print Buddhist works in Tibetan and Mongolian languages, both for monks and for the lay public. The later half of 19th century saw the rise of Buryatian National School of Architecture, Painting and Sculpture. Following the Tibetan canon, Buryat masters created outstanding works in each of these art forms, partially because they influenced them with the spirit and style of their local tradition. The greatest example of Buryatian school of architecture is the temple complex of Gusyno-Ozerski or Tamchinsky Datsan. This is style mixture than Chinese. It is the mixture of Chinese, Tibetan, and just a little Russian architecture also. And the best example of icon painting are tankas by Lama Asur Budaev. You can see. In sculpture, there are wooden figures representing members of Buddhist pantheon and portrait of outstanding lamas made by organ toy masters from Yeganjinsky Datsan. Master Tsibikov was the greatest artist in Yeganjinsky Datsan. He lived in the late 19th and early 20th century. A large album devoted to the work of Master Sanjay Tsibikov was published several years ago. This master is considered the founder of the first Buryatian professional art school. Woodworking was long-established traditional craft among the Buryats. They were all-around masters using wood for cutting, building, and painting. But the Buddhist arts and culture brought to the Buryats a new idea of the beauty of deities. Tsibikov schools, which mostly produced wooden and paper-mache sculpture, developed the uniform style. It works marked by an unusual type of beauty, like you see, a mixture of European and Asian features. We can observe the influence of Mongolia Zanabadzar in the wild shoulder of deities also. Some details belong to the Dolanar school. Also Master Tsibikov. And also he created the portrait of lamas. This is influence of Mongolian style. And this is very rare form. And some details belong to the Dolanar school. It is school of Inner Mongolia style. But overall, this is an original style of wooden sculpture painted in warm natural colors. The majority of works by Buryatian masters are housed in National Museum of Republic of Buryatia. Description of Buryatian Buddhist collection was a long-time project by Svetlana Batyurovna Bardaleva. The first book about Tanka collection was written by Professor Badmajafov in 1990s. Later, many scholars worked to research and study Buryatian painting and its character features. For a long time, Buryat style was confused with Chinese tanka, for example, the late 19th and early 20th century, because the Chinese tanka was also included into the different monasteries. And after 100 years ago, researchers don't know what is the original style of Buryat, or it is original or is Chinese. But today, thanks to efforts of many researchers, among them Yulia Igorevna Yelikhina, the chief custodian of Tibetan and Khatan collection in Hermitage Museum, we can say that Buryat painting is distinguished by the And like you see, it is painting is distinguished by the late figures of deities and characteristic natural range of colors. All colors are very natural. Synthetic pigments were not available in Buryatia at that time, while the Chinese works, like you see, at the same period use a vibrant emerald green color. Apart from Chinese and Buryatian Tankas and Buryatian, Mongolian, Tibetan, and Delanor sculptures, which included, for example, the statue was statue made by Master Zanabazar. Also, the museum housed a unique book, the Atlas of Tibetan Medicine. As is well known, the development of Tibetan medicine was greatly influenced by Desi, the regent Sagyen Gyatso, Desi Sagyen Gyatso, another pronunciation, the great scientific of the 17th century, Tibetan scientific. He wrote many medical treatises, including Vaidurya Anbo, a commentary on the Gyu-Shi treatise in 12th century. Buryatian Atlas of Tibetan Medicine is a copy of Tibetan original, which consists of 77 sheets, only one of them now it is the lost. The size of each sheet is 81.5 by 66.5 centimeters. Overall, the atlas included 10,000 pictures. All illustrations have uniform format and composition, the same size, and are made in the traditional Tanka painting technique, using mineral pigments on a coat line canvas. The upper part of each sheet contains the inscription in Tibetan language, marking the parts chapter of section of a blue beryl treatise that this picture illustrated. Each picture has an inscription. Some of them is really unique. For example, one of them depicting all stage of baby during pregnancy. I don't know how they do that, but it is so, and depicting. And now contemporary scholars or medicine scholars, they say, yes, it's the same. Now we know by our technique how it looked like, but it was many, many years ago. According to Natalia Lvovna Zhukovskaya, one of the distinguished Russian scholars specializing in Buddhist culture, how this copy came to be remains a mystery with more speculations than clearly established facts. Most likely, the copy of the atlas was commissioned and paid by Agvan Darjiev, one of the 7 tutors of Dalai Lama XIII. According to one option, Atlas of Tibetan Medicine was brought to Russia by Buryatian M.Ch. Lama doctors Shirab Sunuev, who for over 10 years had studied Tibetan medicine in eastern Tibet in Shertep Manba Monastery. Until 1926, the atlas was presumably kept in Tsungol Datsan. Then, in a request of Agvan Darjiev, the abbot of Tsungol Datsan handed atlas to the Atsagat Datsan. At that time, both these monasteries had Manba Datsan. Manba means medical faculties where the future M.Ch.'s lamas, its translation doctors, healthers, studied of the basic of Tibetan medicine. The atlas was used as a teaching guide. In 1930s, during the anti-religious campaign in Russia, all Datsans were closed and their possessions either transferred to the museums or destroyed. Miraculously, the Atlas of Tibetan Medicine survived. When in 1936 Tsagan Datsan was about to be closed, one of the lamas managed to hide the atlas in a secret place. The same year, in order to project his lama and preserve the atlas, Jabon, an outstanding expert in Buratian Buddhist treatises and in antiquities, persuaded the brave saver to the atlas to give this illustrated compendium to the museum. The Lama agreed, and the atlas was transferred to Ullan-Ude Republican Museum of Local History. Since then, the atlas never changed its place of the residence. Gradually, the atlas became a standard research source of Tibetan medicine. In 1968, Buratian division of Siberian branch of Soviet Academy of Science established a research group to study the heritage of Indian Tibetan Mongolian medicine. This group, headed by Baltmazhapov, included doctors, botanics, specialists in Tibetan and Mongolian studies, as well as MChis, Lama's doctors, who by the time had returned from prisons and prisons camp. And Natalia Zhukovskaya wrote that after returning from the prison camps, Lamas were banned from living not only in Ullan-Ude, capital city of Republic Buryatia, but even in their native village. To consult with them, the Lamas had to be found in faraway regions and brought to the city, when then they had returned back. Most of the Lamas consulted the scholars without any fee, but gradually it became possible to formally hire some of them as junior research assistants at the Buryatia division of Siberian branch of the Soviet Academy of Science. According to Baltmazhapov, at that time there was no information that the full set of the early copy of Atlas existed in the other countries except in Russia. Californian University Library has the 12 pictures, copy of the original houses by Beijing Buddhist monastery, which were brought to the USSR in 1947 by Tibetologicals and Sinologic Lessing, very famous, you know. Another famous image, Another famous image that has long been in a collection of the National Museum of Buryatia was Sandalwood Buddha. Its name is Danju. In the first decade of the 21st century, a book and several articles of the famous Sandalwood Buddha images was published by a well-known Russian Buddhologist Andrei Terentiev. According to the legend, Sandalwood Buddha is an image created during the lifetime of Buddha Shakyamuni, which for a long time survived in Tibet and later in Khotan and China. In the early 20th century, the statue was secretly brought to Buryatia and until 1935 has housed in Agetuski Datsan, Agetuski Monastery. Later, it was stored to the National Museum of Buryatia, and in 1991, the statue was returned to Agetuski Datsan, and in 2003, it was officially acknowledged by Russian government as a sacred Buddhist relic of Russian Federation. Buddhism also has a rich and diverse history in Kalmykia. By early 20th century, Kalmykia had over 90 large and small huruls. Huruls means monasteries, which about 3,000 clerics. Zaya Pandit, 17th century creator of Ayrat Todo Bechik, translation is clear writing system based on the Mongolian script. The translator of sutras and other texts was a Kalmyk. The empire new subjects arrived with their more available card-carrier Buddhism temples, the huruls. But the story and the fate of Kalmyk art is even more tragic. Unfortunately, it is so. In 1930s, Stalin budget led to the destruction of almost all temples. with Buddhist clerically suffering violent persecution. By the time Great Patriotic War broke out, Buddhism in Kalmykia was virtually wiped out. Forced deportation of the Kalmyks in 1943 completed the destruction of Buddhism. It was really tragic because all Kalmykian people need to left their territory for 1 week. 1 week, huge territory need be left. The first visit of His Holiness Dalai Lama, 14, in summer of 1991, became a landmark event in the religious life of Kalmykia. It provided a powerful impulse to the development of Buddhism in Republic of Kalmykia. As for Kalmyk Buddhist arts, it has been a long-term research project of Svetlana Garivna Batareva. Kalmykian architecture is syncretic in its character since it combines different traditions, nomadic, Buddhist, and just a little also classical architecture of Russia. Kalmyk Republican Museum of Local History and Novocherkassk Museum of History of Don Cossacks contain several works that demonstrated characters, features of Kalmykian Buddhist arts. The ideas to the folk arts and influence of the Dolanor school in Chinese art. For example, like that. No, like you see, it is not melting. It is not casting. It is melting. But now we understand that it is just a little separate, Kalmykian and Dolanor style. As for Buddhist arts of Tuva, in the late 1920s, this religion had 37 large and small monasteries, called in Tuva Hure, in Tuvan languages, and over 4,000 lamas. However, by the late 1930s, all huruls was also destroyed. Lamas were sent home, and only a few dozens of them continued to practice in a secret. The collection of sculpture, painting, ritual objects, and texts stored in the National Museum of Republic of Tuva has over 1,000 items. But only last year, it's described and analyzed for the first time the Yulia Igorevna Yelikhina from Hermitage Museum. And also in our conference we published this text in English. Now we have it also in English. It's very important, I think. And according to her research, ritual objects, sculptures, and paintings arrived to the museum from the Buddhist temples after they were closed in 1930s. However, the most of artifacts became a part of the museum collection in 1960, after the closure of the only surviving small Buddhist yurta temple in Nizhny Chadan. It's the place Nizhny Chadan. This hure was built after the Second War. And you know that after the Second War, people felt that they need a religion. It was very hard, and our government decided, yes, okay, maybe in one territory only one temple, but they need again to open, because people was so strong and powerful for needed, because was so many tragic this period was in our country. And the museum received Nepal sculptures of the early and middle 20th centuries, as well as Mongolian porcelain mask at the same period, plastic tsatsa and the property of the hure. Why it was so? Because in 19th century, all monasteries, for example, Tuva, Buryatia, and Buryatia, they have not only their own style, sculptures and painting, they have whole Tibetan, Mongolian, Chinese, very much in very different styles, sculptures and tankas. That sense, the first monasteries were houses in yurts, as we're talking about Tuvans. Wooden structure appeared only later. The first Kyrgyz monastery was built in 1772. According to surviving information, the architecture of majority of Tuvan wooden monasteries reflected Chinese influence, of course, because since the middle 18th century, the territory of what now we know as Republic of Tuva was a part of Manchu Qing Empire, 1644-1911. That sense were educational and cultural centers, also like everywhere. Monks transcribed and printed books, made sculpture, they painted tankas. Their artists studied in Tibet, Mongolia, Nepal, and China. But according to Yulia Ilikhina, they developed their own artistic signature style. Tuvan's artists did not copy Tibetan tankas, but introduced their own perception and create work in their own style. The National Museum housed an entire series of painting, sculpture, and xylographic boards that can be attributed as the work of local masters. But that work is continued now also, because it is not very easy to say something about this is only Chinese style or only Kalmyk. It is continue. Another character of Tuva features Tuva tanka painting its images of miniature tree, unusually shaped flowers decorating mandorlas, as well as ratnas floating in the water. I see, maybe, for example, like that. Right. Museum collection has unique few images of Mahakala also, and since the deity was very popular in Tuva. Okay. No, maybe just some about Pandilkhamo. As you can see, this is style of Tuvans Pandilkhalmo. Just some influence. At first, it is, of course, it is folk influence, like we see, and another Mongolian. And the second, the largest part of the Russian Buddhist art collection was assembled in St. Petersburg, and to the lesser degree in Moscow, thanks to the researchers and travels. St. Petersburg, Datsan, the first Datsan in Europe and Russia, and still now it is the northern Datsan, I mean that the monastery, not on the temple, like the real monastery in Europe, was built at the beginning of the 20th centuries. The construction was initiated also by Agvan Darjiev, diplomat and the tutor of Dalai Lama XIII. The funds were collected from anywhere, including Buryats and Kalmyk. A third of the required sum was donated by Dalai Lama XIII. Many Oriental scholars were involved in the construction of the temple. The interior was designed with the participation of the artist Nikolai Roerich. I think in India very well known this name. The first service took place in the February 1913. It was scheduled to coincide with the 300-year anniversary of the Romanov dynasty. In 1930, it was ceased to exist as a temple, but fortunately was not destroyed. In 1991, it was reopened and now is working, and the monastery life is also continuing in this monastery. During the second half of 19th century, early 20th centuries, Buddhist ideas gained very popular among Russian philosophers, writers, poets, and artists. Russian scholars developed their interest in Buddhism not only through the contact with Buratian and Kalmyks and neighboring Mongolia, but also through Western European countries, where many philosophical and theosophical societies existed at that time. Buddhist philosophy influenced such outstanding Russian philosophers as Solovyov, Berdyaev, Bulgakov, writers, you know these names, Tolstoy, Bunin, poets Khlebnikov, Voloshin, Gumilev, Balmont, and many others, artists Nikolai Roerich, Bax, and many, many others. In the middle 19th century, a new field of Buddhology emerged as a part of the Russian Oriental studies. This discipline unified a research of Buddhism in all its aspects: philosophy, logic, history, ritual system, and later the arts. The first Russian Buddhologists were 19th century scholars. It was Vasiliev, sinological, Tibetological, specialist in Mongolia and Manchu study, and Minaev. Minaev was an Indologist, expert in Sanskrit and Pali languages. And they established the Russian School of Oriental Arts. And together with their students, Oldenburg and Sherbatskoy, late 19th, early 20th centuries, the next generation of 20th century scholars was Rosenberg, Vostrikov, Yuri Roerich, it is this son of Nikolai Roerich. And Oldenburg held the creation of Biblioteka Buddhika. It is the series of publications featuring both original and translated Buddhist texts. It is one of the specific features of our Buddhology, that all the time we translate not from British translation, strict line. From Pali to Russian, from Sanskrit to Russian, from Hindi to Russian, and so on. And this series was replaced by Monuments of Eastern Literature series, launched in 1965 and published to these days. Therefore, it were examined carefully the sources of Buddhist collection in St. Petersburg Museum, and to some extent in Moscow Museum also. We will find that they came either from gifts, especially it was gifts, or from the expedition by Minaev, Academy member, Sherbatskoy, travel, Pyotr Kozlov, like you see, Ukhtomsky, Kot Chamberlain, and from the collection belongs to the son of famous Fabergé jewels. You know maybe you know that Fabergé jewels, it is very famous, but also his son have huge Buddhist collection. And it is this fact not much people know, but it is this so. Now this collection in St. Petersburg Hermitage. All this private collection became a foundation for the museum's collection of the State Hermitage Museum and Museum of Ethnograph Kunstkamera. For many years, Julia Igorevna Yelikhina was been a keeper of Buddhist collection in Hermitage Museum. She is a senior research assistant at the regional department of the State Hermitage Museum and custodian of Mongolian, Tibetan, and Khotan collections. In 2015, she published a catalogue of the Abode of Mercy exhibition. It was the most complete representation of Hermitage collection. Overall, the Hermitage collection included about 6,000 items of Buddhist arts, including tanka, sculpture, tsatsa, and ritual objects. The Hermitage collection features different style of sculptures, like you see. There are some of Ganharian sculptures from the Kashmir, Tibetan picture sculptures from the 11th century and later, Nepal and Chinese. Also, the Hermitage collection including 30 sculptures from Inner Mongolia. It is, I talk about that, the Dalarnor style. Last year, our university's expert laboratory, together with Yulia Yulikhina, analyzed the metal composition of this sculpture. And we all only, it was first step to know what is the metal composition. It's very important, like we think in the future for experts. And also you see Pala style, Chinese style, Nepalese, many. It's Dolonor also in Mongolia. And also different tankas. Tankas from mainly from Tibet, Mongolia, Buryatia, but some of them is very rare. For example, this Bhutan painting. And why is so dark? Because previous time it was all the silver. It was silver color. It was very bright, but after the time became so dark. And for example, different arhats. Some of them is really unique. This is painting by Karmapa 10. We know this very unique style. It's non-features is any styles, for example. And also something like that, also unique Chinese style. And where you can see only that, you can see only a Hermitage Museum collection. It is tankas from Harahota. It is really unique. It was that has been lost in the sands of the Gobi Desert and open and famous stupa. As is well known, Harahota was the capital of the Tangut named Sisya state destroyed in the Mongols in the 13th century. Harahota tankas may be provisionally diverted into Tibetan style and Chinese style, like you see. Also, one more big collection, it is St. Petersburg Kunstkamera Museum collection. And it consists for 640 sculptures. The sources of this collection are varied. Mostly they are travels collections as well as gifts from the Tsar family. We have many gifts to the Tsar family in late 19th century, and it was very different. Some of them was Buryatian, and some of them was from Chinese, from Mongolia, and other. And another major source of the gift was the 3 centuries anniversary of the Romanov dynasty in 1913. Nicholas II gave more of the gifts of Kunstkamera and Hermitage Museum. Monks give the Tsar give to the museums. However, the main part of Buddhist sculpture collection in Kunstkamera consists of the sculptures confiscated by the Russian Customs Service in 1914. Somebody was trying to illegally take this sculpture out of Russia. That is, without being an hour of this sculpture. And like you see, now they have, luckily, only 2 years ago, but now we have a catalog. And also, Russian museum started to put the picture of the sculpture of their collection to the internet. And now it is possible to view for different researchers from different parts of the world. And also, one of big museum is the Museum of Oriental Art, Moscow. Like you see, we have maybe not so much, but very different styles. Especially, we have some of. Just a minute. It's. Oh. Okay. Japanese style, of course, and very early Japanese sculpture. And this is two of Zanabadzar Mongolian styles. It's very famous, and it was not so much the sculptures in the world. And also, what about our region? Apart from the central museums of Moscow and St. Petersburg, a number of Russian religion museums also hold Buddhist collection. In my region, the Ural region and Siberia, Buddhist metal sculpture, less often tanka, can be found in museum of collection in Ekaterinburg, Chelyabinsk, Barnaul, Irkutsk, and many other cities. These collections are small, but they have an interesting story. We can identify two waves by which Eastern artifacts were brought to these collections, including the collection of Buddhist bronze in Ural region. The first wave of collecting items from China, Japan, Mongolia, and Tibetan in Ural and Siberia cities was carried out by merchants and industrialists who strived to imitate art patrons and collectors of St. Petersburg and Moscow during the 19th century. In Ural region, where my university is located, Ural Mountains divide Eurasia in two parts. The city of Ekaterinburg is considered the border between Europe and Asia. And in this region, the so-called the Tea Road was particularly important. It was the road from China to Ural, used by merchants to transport tea in the 18th and 19th century. Together with the tea, the ceramics, Buddhist sculpture was also imported, ending in the Ural collections. The second wave of Buddhist metal sculpture in Ural is tied to the tragic page of our history. Then, during the 1940s, trains from Kalmykia and Buryatia came to Ural loaded with Buddhist sculptures sent to be melted at the Ural metal plants. Ordinary people, common workers, very simple people, often store these sculptures. They knew nothing about Buddhism. Ural was mostly the Christian religion, like we know. However, their hearts and minds could not accept that such beauty could not be cast in the burning stove and destroyed. Then many years, what they do, of course, they hide some of them to their own house, to the private house. And then many years later, these sculptures found their way into the museum collection of Ekaterinburg and Chelyabinsk. And that is why now we have different styles from the two waves, very unusual situation. One of them is researchers and merchants, but another is like what people think about Buddhists. Maybe they don't know anything about Buddhism, but they hardly view the beauty, and that is why these sculptures was saved. And one more little plot, it's my famous plot, because it is a very unusual story about relationship between Russia and India. It is the photo of sculpture Durga. And it was found in very early in the middle of 19th century, and it was covered by earth, by mining gold sands near one of the Ural cities, and there were not researchers, but people who love to study. It was Nobelist people, Nobelish. And the inscription by this photo was, maybe in future, some of the researchers who know what is this tell about that people. When I read this text, I was so impressed by this inscription, because I understand they told that it is Buddhist arts, but I understand that of course it's not Buddhist, it is Durga. And some years ago, my last visit, we also trying to I have advice from different scholars and ask them, am I right or not, that what do you think it is early period or not, because it's really unique. And many different researchers said that yes, it is so. Now we don't know where is it. It is only photo, but we know that it was excavating, not by merchants, not by, it was excavating. It means that somebody, I don't know what it does it mean exactly, but we know that in very early period, what is the fact? In very early period, we have connection. I think, yes, maybe by merchants at first, but connection between India and very northern part of our Eurasia. And let me, on this point, let me finish and thank you for your attention a lot. Now I want to present and just little showed our public, because I think it is very important that now we have one of them in Russian, unfortunately, maybe next time, but two of them in English. Just a minute.
Next time when? Next time, what is the time?
The first, let me present for Intech. It is our catalog about what I'm talking, that Hermitage collection, Sverdlovsk region collection, and private collection. You can see how it was first.
Thank you very much.
And it is two books also in English: Contemporary Buddhist Art, Tradition and Innovation, and Buddhist Art, Tradition and Innovation, Diversity and Harmony of Buddhist Art in Eurasia Cultural Space. This is contained about what I'm talking. First text about Kalmykian Buratian arts and Tuvan's Buratian arts, also in English. And please, if somebody...
Delegates also?
It will be in the Intech library in case anyone ever wants to refer to it at a later date.
Not for delegates. Not for delegates.
If you have a question, I try to answer it.
You have given very detailed and in-depth study you have done. I congratulate you. We want these slides. Can you give to us a presentation and slides, because we want to also do the research. And secondly, I want to know that what is the status of Buddhism in Russia?
No.
Yeah, as and today. What is the status of viharas in Russia?
It is one.
What is the population in Russia who is Buddhist? That much I want to know.
Mm-hmm. Now, like in the previous time, after Soviet period, also like in Tsar kingdom, we have official religions. It is three: Orthodox Christianity, Islam, and Buddhist also. And like in previous time, we have three territory: Kalmykian, Buratian, Tuvan, who is mainly Buddhists. But also, of course, we living in contemporary world, and we have some dharma centers on St. Petersburg, because in St. Petersburg, like you see, it is the monastery, like Gunchön Tsalin, it is named by Tibetan, and we have a monastery and we have a group, of course. No, it is not totally widespread. But in St. Petersburg especially, it is a very important part of culture. Yeah.
Percentage population percentage, how many percentage?
Oh, I need to check. And yeah, I need to check because no, we have 9, 7, 8, 80 different territory in our country, and ethnic group, about 300 ethnic group. We is very different like Indians also. We speak in Russian, but we very different, of course. But Buratian and Kalmykian, it is, I think maybe Kalmykian and Tuvans totally Buddhists. Buratians maybe 19%, yes.
Madam, you have discussed about Vajrayana in your speech, but you told us in Hinayana, Mahayana. What is the status of Hinayana, Mahayana?
No, it's the same. I think it depends on the researcher.
Hinayana, Mahayana, Sahyana, Vajrayana.
No, I mean that Mahayana. At first, Mahayana.
Yes.
It's widespread Mahayana, because our monks not followed by Hinayana.
In Russia, who are more?
No, only one Mahayana. Mahayana, yes. No, Dzongkhapa's line.
Yep, it was a really good presentation. I enjoyed it all through.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. Oh, I wanted to know, you talked about the Mongolian and European influence in the art. So Mongolian is still understood. How can you just spread some light on how the European influence came into the Buddhist art?
You mean in Buryatia, for example?
Yes, the one that you discussed in the beginning. There were some sculptures and paintings which had the European influence.
Yes, I understand. What we mean when we're talking about European, of course, at first we mean that it is the Russian influence, because in 19th century, Russian cultures was oriented by European. It was like European culture. And now it is a very important thing that now, step by step, we understand that like our territory, some part of us, it's European, of course, but another part like in Asia. And during 19th century, it was very high level of culture, but we forget our roots, our Asian roots. But we have it, of course. As about influence by different features of European features, I mean that it was Russian, because the type of beauty is very unusual. It is like the mixture between European Russian and Asia, like Buryatian.
Just to add, so it did not come from outside. It was the Russian itself, the Russian influence, not from outside Russia, anywhere else in Europe.
No.
Thank you.
Hi. Thank you very much for your presentation.
Thanks.
I just had a question about the Namthar that you depicted, the Namthar of Lama Tsongkhapa. Are there any such paintings, thankas, that depict biographies of local personalities, Buddhist personalities that you know of, or if I could find any information about it?
You mean different lamas, portrait of lamas?
Not portraits, they're biographies. Because that one was a Namthar, it was a biography of Tsongkhapa.
Yeah.
Yes, if there are any paintings that depict these biographies of local personalities, like
Namtar of Tsongkhapa, you mean?
Yes, similar to that.
Let me think. I think no, not like exactly like Namtar. I think no. I need to check, but maybe very rare. It was the traditional two portraits, but not Namtars. I think that maybe very short period, because Namtars means that it is long history. 3rd century, it is not huge, of course. But maybe I mistake. I don't know. I need to check, but I think so.
Maybe there is some oral biographies then maybe.
We have by text, of course.
You have texts
Yes.
of local personalities?
Yes.
Okay.
Like text, of course.
Okay.
Yes, but not like painting or
Alright.
not like tankas, for example.
Thank you so much.
The translation which you are talking about from Pali to this, you said there is no English interpreter or something. Are they, the translator was well versed in both the languages so that you can directly convert?
What about question?
Translation of text.
You said translation from Pali to Russian,
Yeah.
vice versa. There was no English.
Yes, and still now we have, for example, last year one lady finished her PhD about Pali text, early Buddhist Pali texts, and she translates from early Pali text exactly to the Russian language, and her PhD was about that. The line of scholars is continue, maybe not so much like previous time, for example, like Soviet time, but it is contained. Continuous, I'm sorry, continue.
Hi, good evening, Professor. That was a very interesting presentation, something which we usually don't talk about in the context of Russia. My question is actually an extension of the previous question. You've talked about the similarities with Chinese and Mongolians and Tibetans. What is the instinctive Russian influence in this art? What would make it different from, say, a Chinese sculptural form or artwork? That was actually my question.
Okay, can I back? Like what? For example, like that. You're asking about special features.
No, I'm just asking about, like, this is Buddhist art in Russia.
Yes.
I'm simply saying that is it similar? Of course, I understand there is an influence, but is there any indigenous influence on this art of the local Russian craftsmanship which is manifest in this entire art collection?
I understand. It is very difficult to answer it. I try to explain, because what does it mean, Russians?
Yeah, I got that. Is it, or maybe of that region particularly, of the inhabitants
Because
before the Buddhist?
yes, when we talk about Russians and or Russia, especially we're thinking about the main field near Moscow, Kiev, and so on. It's like specialist Russians. But when in 19th century and many rather, we have Russian Empire. It means that we talking in Russian languages and have by noble we have the same style, for example, like classical style of architecture, like in Europe. But in every part of Russia was different craftsmen, different people, different languages, and so on, and different cultural tradition. And when I speak about Russian influence, it's very difficult to me to answer because I don't know who is the Russians' influence in this period. We can talk only about Russians craftsmen who lived in Buryatia at this period. Yes, it was.
So Russia is famous for various crafts, enameling. There's so much of craft of all kinds. So are there any Buddhist statues, paintings, which are made in the Russian, what we as outsiders know as the Russian craft? Because Russia is very rich in crafts. So you have the Fabergé eggs, you have the inlay in we have so many vessels which are made in silver with enameling work and all that. So has anything been ever made in on a Buddhist platform?
Yes, I understand the question, but it's very difficult to answer. No, for example, like I show you one more book, my present, and maybe you understand what does they mean. For example, that it is the crafts of Ural, what we have by stones. It's unique. It's also Russians. But in any part of our country, we can't see that crafts. Only in Europe. It's really unique. You can see the quality. It's amazing quality. Maybe one sculpture is 20 type of minerals and stones. But in any
Buddhist sculpture.
it is not Buddhist, but we don't have, it is Russians, for example, but only in Europe. And when we're talking about influence of Russian craftsmen, we need to talk on Buddhism, we need to talk only about Russian people who live in this territory.
So maybe it means that the Russians respected the original Buddhist look and did not try to put their own craft into it. And the artist came from
It's not a Malacca. It is Malacca. Yes, all of Malacca.
because they never she have never seen. Yeah, but
Because
you
when you answer me about Russians, I don't know what to answer to you. Who is Russians, especially in 19th century? We have Russian population that means that speak in English or in Russian. But the craftsman was so different. We can't, I think that you don't see before. And nobody.
Most of these statues are before the 19th century, what you showed us, right? So it was when Russia was Russia.
Buratian, Kalmykian, and
When it was Russia.
18th and 19th centuries, especially 17th.
Yeah, so that's Russian empire.
We can continue the informal discussion later on over tea. We have a small token of appreciation for Dr. Demenova. On behalf of INTAC, thank you very much for that wonderful presentation, informative and feast to the eyes. And thank you once again for coming, for taking time out from your busy schedule and making this lecture happen at INTAC. Please. And my thanks again to our maintenance and admin divisions for their cooperation, to our creative team, which is actually Alia from Architectural Heritage, who's so forthcoming with her help. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for coming. Please join us for a cup of tea outside.
We will be happy to get the presentation format.